Welcome, 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 ladies and gentlemen, to yet again, another edition of What Really Matters NYC, live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. with your host, Tony Keevan. That's me, and we've got our commentator, Lorraine, on the line. Commentator Lorraine, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
How are you doing?
Fabulous.
Great. And we have a guest, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, today. His name is Mike Gallagher. We'll bring him up on the Skype and say hello to Mike. Mike, how are you?
I'm very well, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for joining us. So Mike Gallagher, a neighbor gave me this pamphlet. She came in the front door and it said, Charlie Rangel is retiring. Mike Gallagher wants your vote. Neighbor, stay at home dad, Democrat for Congress, number NY13. I guess that means congressional district?
Hashtag NY13. If you're on Twitter, it's the hashtag for the district. Yeah.
Okay, the hashtag for the district. Okay.
But it's Congressional District 13 that we're representing.
Great. So I was very interested, of course, in the Congressman Rangel. We did a bunch of shows on him, and we won't go into that. But
we all know the story.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in understanding anyone who's running for office in Harlem. First, of course, we want to extend our condolences to all the suffering that has come about because of yet another terror attack in Belgium, in Brussels. So I wanted to ask you, and I'm sure you share the sentiment, but I wanted to ask you about as you're running for Mr. Rangel's office and you want to help New York, what do you think can be done to make us a little safer from stuff like that?
Well, I have to endorse what's been done. I don't think that there's any question the New York Police Department is working actively. It's working with the federal government, the Joint Terrorism Task Force that we all know about. The New York City Police Department, it's almost 40,000 policemen, if I'm not mistaken, and it has its own intelligence. It has its own connections to the federal, the largest field office outside of Washington, D.C., I believe, is in New York. So I believe we just have to persist in the things that we do and continue to be as vigilant as we are. I mean, I know, I grew up here and around. It was in New Jersey for part of my youth, and we didn't have moments where if you see something, say something. I mean, it was pretty benign the way that we lived our lives. But, everyone, I think, is aware at this point of the risk of terrorism and tries to make some sense of it. So.
Okay, well, that's a nice, frank answer. So I wanted to kind of ask you some general questions about your running for office. It says you're a stay-at-home dad. So tell us a little bit about that. What's that mean to be a stay-at-home dad?
Well, I began in 2003. My oldest son was born in late November in 2003, and I made a decision with my wife where she was going to persist in her career, which she believed in and which she wanted, to continue in. And I felt that, at the time, I didn't expect that I would still be doing this 12 or 13 years later as we approached 13 years. But I felt that it was worth making a sort of sacrifice, an investment. I grew up in a somewhat traditional family where my mom was home.
So wait a minute, you've been a stay-at-home dad for 13 years?
I have, yes.
Holy cow. So I bet you cook well.
It's easy, actually, but it's
What's your
true.
kid's favorite dish? I'm just testing to make sure you're telling us the truth.
Sure. Lately,
cook.
it's barbecued spare ribs.
Barbecue spare ribs?
I do a pretty mean barbecued spare ribs in the oven. Even though we don't have a grill, I cook them during the day and then broil them up in the evening.
Okay, you passed the test. That's really good.
But I make a fair amount of Italian. I grew up in an Italian household. My mom is my Italian grandparents. My mom, I learned a lot in that vein. And
I guess you're very sensitive now to the value of stay-at-home parents, I guess, of any sex.
It's true, but I also think that it's a luxury. I mean, many people would say it was easy for you, and it wasn't easy. I mean, I tell people, look, if I had bet my father, I went to Harvard. If I had bet my father at the time that I was going to be staying at home with my children, he would have probably rolled his eyes at me and been like, "What?" It's a thing that is worth doing, but it's increasingly hard for families to be able to manage this kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, that's I guess a great point, and because sometimes, and I'm very fortunate to have always in my life had decent jobs, but I can that pay well, but even everyone thinks they struggle when they live in New York City. But I can't imagine how some families live in New York City to manage their children in the schools with,
I
not a
mean,
lot of money.
it's easier now because we've been here longer and everything else. But we were counting pennies in the beginning when I stayed home. I mean, the money would have mattered, but I felt it was an investment, and this is the investment that I think everyone should be entitled to. I don't think America is rare among all of the nations of the world, and we don't have some kind of real paid family leave. And paid family leave is not really a benefit. It's more of a shared responsibility that we have between employers, men and women. It's something that I believe, we are a civilized nation. We like to think of ourselves as a leader, and yet in this we lag far behind many, many countries.
Sure. So I wanted to ask you about your renter's tax deduction. I thought it was a great idea. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that would help stay-at-home
Sure.
moms and dads who are trying to struggle?
Well, I don't even think, even just the housing stress that people feel in New York City. I mean, our district in Congressional District 13, the median price of renting is about $1,000. And we all know $1,000 right now might not get you something, that you like, but that's the middle ground. And if you were to be able to get a 15% credit on your taxes, I mean, rich people who buy homes are able to write off $100,000 a year in the federal tax code. They can write off more than $8,000 a month in interest on their taxes right off the top. And renters who do pay some taxes through their rent money don't get to write off a penny of their taxes. And so from my perspective, if we were to be able to get a 15% renter's tax credit in the federal tax code, which we all know the Republicans are going to do tax reform in the coming session. So a renter's tax credit at $1,000 would put $1,700 in people's pockets come April when they file their taxes. And that's real money that they can use for their families, that they can use for life in this very tough city.
Okay, so let me ask you a hard question, okay? So Mr. Rangel, maybe he could have done that because he was the chairman of the budget committee. I think also commerce committee, all sorts of stuff. You got to pull a lot of strings. How are you going to start to make that happen running for office here in such a local level?
Well, my belief is that renting is not a partisan issue. If you spoke to me about any congressional representative in the United States and pointed me to their website or the issues of their district, I'm sure I could find you. It might not be as much as here, where it's like a 70-30, maybe even 75-25 split, where most people are renting. But in Phoenix, in conservative places in the South, people rent. Not everybody can afford to buy a home. And so for me, it's the idea that you can give people who, when wages are stagnant, wages are not increasing, housing prices, everybody knows housing prices are up, and that's an accommodation that when it comes to tax reform, because the Republicans are going to drive tax reform, and their only answer when they talk about tax reform and tax policy is to give rich people tax cuts. And that's all we've seen is rich people. Like I said, if you are able to write off $8,000 a month in taxes, I mean, in this district, I'm not sure you could find many apartments that rent for $8,000 a month.
Sure. Okay, so we'll get to Trump in a second, talking about real estate and stuff like that. But Lorraine, you have a question for our congressman to be?
Candidate, we'll say. To be would be great, but candidate.
Yes, very, very good. I want to know what other issues you'd bring to the Congress to help average New York citizens.
Did you hear the question?
I did not. I could not.
Okay, I think she asked, Lorraine asked about any other issues you wanted to bring to the Congress?
Well, I believe, again, because this is a pretty working class district, is that the earned income tax credit is another example where tax policy is going to make a difference in people's lives. And many people in this district depend on this essential tax credit. And if I were to take the example of there's a sort of marriage penalty that's enforced that is going to expire next year, they made permanent tax cuts for rich people, but they didn't make permanent the tax benefits for working people who need it. And there are other provisions of that tax break that I think that can be improved upon. And as well, I'm an advocate for statehood for Puerto Rico. I believe that on a moral and financial basis that this is the solution to the fiscal crisis in Puerto Rico. The United States has ruled Puerto Rico for well more than 100 years. And for more than 100 years, we've fought, they've died, they've persisted as kind of second-class citizens in the United States, and it's time that it ends. I mean, they're not going to become. I don't believe in independence for Puerto Rico. I know there are people all throughout Puerto Rico and throughout this district, again, which has a home to many people of Puerto Rican descent, that the United States, we don't have an example of an unsuccessful state. And Puerto Ricans voted for statehood in 2012. There's going to be another vote for statehood, and it's well within the Congress's power to add Puerto Rico to the United States. And it would be a giant success, and it would demonstrate to the world what is exceptional about America, which is much different than what goes on in Crimea and Ukraine with the Russians. It's an example for the rest of the world.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit about the election that's coming up. Exactly when is the election going to be? So you're running for in this primary that's upcoming?
This primary is June 28th. This year is June 28th. It's not connected to the presidential primary, which is next month, as we all know. It's its own federal date set by the Board of Elections, which is a peculiarity, if only because I think that we would have probably gotten a better turnout if we were tied into Mrs. Clinton and Bernie Sanders and the rest of the presidential primaries. Excuse me, but in this case, it is its own primary. It's the only reason to come out. Senator Schumer is running unopposed, so there's not really a primary there. It's really about this race for Congressman Rangel's replacement.
So tell us what your edge is and why you want everyone to vote for you. And you've got like 2 minutes here. Why should we vote for you? I mean, a stay-at-home dad. You did go to Harvard, so that's great. You know, we don't have a lot of smart politicians out there. So
no, there's plenty of smart people from Harvard. I don't think that's the reason. The reason for me that I'm advocating for is because I believe that the politicians that we've elected in Albany and Washington are disconnected from the rest of us. They're captive of a system that's really about wealthy and connected people, and most people are neither of those things. And what we need right now is someone to represent the interests of real, average, working-class people in this district. People like myself who are raising a family, who are struggling. I mean, I'm not struggling like many people. For many people, my life is super, but I know I come from an immigrant family. My grandparents came to this country in the 20s. My grandparents came from Ireland and Italy with very little on their backs and tried to make a success of their life. And it still remains a place of hope and dreams for many people. And I think some of that has kind of gotten off track because our politicians are letting us down. And my belief is that I bring a kind of I've been in business. I know what it's like to try to raise a family. I know the things that people are interested in, which is jobs, housing, healthcare, and education, essentially. These are the things that define our lives. And I believe I can bring a better solution and better. I can offer much more to the people than what we are getting, which I think if you see what happens in Albany and you see some of the things, that we've seen in the last several years, it's hard to accept professional politicians are going to do much better. I mean, that's the essence of my argument. If you want an outsider, if you want things to change, people need to change the player, and that's me.
Got it. Okay, well, Mike, what's your website?
It is MikeGallagherForCongress.com.
Okay, perfect. So we encourage everybody to go visit your website because, Harlem's going to change one way or the other, so you may as well learn about the candidates. And, we'll come up with our endorsement in another month or so, and we'll have you back, Mike, for sure to find out what's going on. And we want to thank you very much for participating and sharing with us, okay?
Thank you very much, Tony. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you all. Okay. Vote on June 28th.
June 28th, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Gallagher for Congress. Okay, thanks so much, and thanks for living up and doing something for our community, okay? We appreciate it.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay,
thanks again, Tony.
Great, cheers. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there we go. So, hey, Lorraine, that was pretty cool.